Hello. Welcome to Number One Life Coach Podcasting. I'm David Stacy, your host. Today we're talking about a career related to the pharmaceutical industry. We have as our guest Steve Milberger, who was the Director of Project Engineering for a pharmaceutical manufacturer here in Irvine. Hello, Steve. Can you tell me something about what you did for your pharmaceutical company?
I can, David. So throughout the years there, when I actually got into the engineering department doing project engineering, I was responsible for overseeing the installation of filling lines for the injectable drugs, or maybe building clean rooms to encase that equipment, or packaging lines where the drug that was produced or filled into vials was inspected and labeled and boxed, or even building out spaces for office space or hazardous waste management or warehouses. So all kinds of different projects, even a parking lot once.
Well, that sounds like an interesting engineering job, but something that someone usually doesn't relate to the making of a generic drug. Please tell me something about what your company produced after you engineered this environment.
One product that we manufactured was a product called Propofol. So it was a generic of an anesthesia product, which was actually a soybean-based emulsion. So water and oil mixed together, turning it into a white emulsion that looked much like milk and had the drug product within it. And one of the things that I did was I designed a compounding room that increased the batch size from 1,500 liters up to 3,000 liters and doubled the capacity, and also half the time in which that product was manufactured or compounded before filling. So that's like one of the projects that I would have worked on. It included 3,000-liter tanks and all kinds of cleaning equipment, automated cleaning equipment and things like that.
So what this company did was they make generic drugs. What are generic drugs compared to the original drugs? What was the purpose of this company? What exactly did they do with this equipment that you helped put together?
Okay, so obviously a pharmaceutical product, one that gets injected into your drugs, has to be a molecule that somebody has invented to target some kind of a disease, and that company spends many millions, hundreds of millions usually of dollars, showing its efficacy and safety for humans, for human consumption. And that is done by a company, and afterwards that patent that they have on that product lasts for a number of years, let's say 15 years. But then other companies, when that patent is over, they target that same molecule, exactly the same one, and they will create a formulation which is the same as the original manufacturer, and they will produce it, and generally they will sell it for a lower cost. So that's what brings the cost down for generic drugs. But the efficacy and the safety of the drug has to be exactly the same as the original manufacturers.
So let me see if I understand this correctly. What your company was doing was they were making copycat drugs and selling them for less than the original drug.
Yes, they were. That's what you did. And generally, that company targeted drugs that were maybe harder to make, or because of their logistics, maybe they were dangerous. The raw drug product was dangerous to handle, and so you had to have special equipment to do so.
Tell me, what was your day-to-day activities like in the process of developing, of re-engineering these manufacturing process for these drugs?
Well, generally, we would think about how that formulation had to be accomplished. Many of the drugs were formulated the same way. A small amount of the drug product itself was added to liquid water, a volume of water, maybe 100 liters, maybe 1,000 liters of water. And so that then gets sterile filtered into a filling machine inside of a clean room, and then those vials that pass through the filling machine get filled. So my job was to figure out where in the facility such a line would be placed, where would be the space for it, how you could fit in a new line if a new drug was being targeted, or how you could manage the flow of personnel to keep the cleanliness of the clean rooms, or to manage outside intrusion of particulate from the outside of the plant. So all of those things had to be considered. So that much of the planning had to go into it.
So you took care of all of the physical necessities and requirements that a company needed to manufacture a generic drug.
That's correct. And one of the jobs that I started with was the controls engineer. So I managed their control systems for equipment. I managed the backups, the upgrades, things like that.
Well, Steve, for a layperson, all this sounds very complicated and very involved. But in the end, it seems like that your company is in the business of copycatting original drugs and selling them cheaper to the consumer. Can you tell us something about that part of the industry?
Yes, I think that that's a simple way of putting it, but there is a lot of logistics that go into making, for instance, specifically generic injectable drugs because of their sterility and you're injecting things into people's veins. But overall, the benefit to our community and overall as a country is it brings the cost of those medications down in general, because at the time many companies go into the business making that molecule, and obviously there's a commercial benefit in that to the consumer because the price comes down, and that's the truth. And the FDA makes sure that the efficacy of those drugs is exactly the same as the original manufacturer.
Well, Steve, I know you're involved in the engineering of these facilities and everything that's involved in the production line. Do you know anything about the real costs of generic drugs and the profit margin between how much drugs cost the manufacturer and how much they are passed on to the consumer? Because there's always talk about pharmaceuticals costing much less in other countries, and the profit margins are too high in the United States. Do you know anything directly about the cost of manufacturing versus what the consumer actually pays?
You know what? I have to say that I'm not in that business end of it. I know that it is costly to set up a production line, for instance. Many of the lines, just the fill portion, compounding and fill portion, was typically around the $10 million mark. And that's generally what it costs just for the equipment, the initial cost of the equipment. So to run those and manage them throughout the time, that was for a generic product on top of it. So that's an idea there. Obviously, the manufacturer makes that money back in time.
So you're saying that it cost about $10 million to set up a facility to produce a generic drug. I imagine the return on the investment must take quite a long time, or the profit margin has to be very high, or distribution has to be very high to get that money back and make a profit on top of that. For each drug, is it $10 million? Or once you have a production line, you're able to make several drugs with that same line?
Generally, you can make a facility, a fill line that makes different products on it. But I'm only talking about the filling portion. That's not the whole utility portion, the manufacture of distilled water, clean steam, or all of the other things that goes into the plant manufacturing and the warehousing and the packaging of the line. So generally, we targeted a payback, a turnaround of at least not less than 3 years.
Very interesting. It sounds like you had quite an experience. Thank you very much for joining us at One Life Coach and giving us a look into the pharmaceutical industry. Thank you, Steve.